I love that. What a fake out, by the way. For a second, I thought I had like a mindfulness meditation, and I was like, oh no, this is just my life. Okay. Hey, we are beginning a brand new series today entitled The Burnout Society, Stress, Exhaustion, and What on Earth We Can Do About It. A series that I'm probably just not going to be very relevant for you. I'm sorry. So I'm joking. It's going to be relevant for all of us. And so to get us started, I want you to imagine that there is a gas tank on the inside of you. And when it comes to things like stress and exhaustion, my question would be this: how are you doing? Like, what are your levels at? Anybody maxing, relaxing? You're like all the way up. You're doing great. Anybody running on empty today? Anybody need me to call AAA to get you home today? I'd be happy to do that. Hey, I'll tell you what, I thought I was doing pretty good. You know, obviously the last few years have been super weird. COVID was a thing. And for me, I'm a huge sports fan. And so COVID, you know, the sports got taken away. So I got pretty sad and pretty fat, actually. And you did, don't judge me, judgment 11 o'clock service. You did too. I socially distanced from everything but the refrigerator, okay? And, but I developed a new hobby in that season. And it was for the first time in my life, I got into baking. And this is a huge turnaround because they're looking at a guy who at one point in his life was nominated by his small group to be on a TV show called Worst Cooks in America. They called me. I turned it down. I was just focused on some other things in my life in the season. But all of a sudden during COVID, I got super into baking. And it all started, I had these leftover bananas and I wanted to find something to do with them. So I was Googling about banana bread. My strategy in general for recipes, and this is worth the price of admission in general today, I just Google world's best fill in the blank. Works every time. So that day it was world's best banana bread. And I took me to this girl's blog, which was great. The pictures were great. So I made this banana bread and I loved it. And then I got into this banana blueberry bread, which is honestly so far still my favorite. And I really like that because of the way those go together. There was a banana and like strawberry, which was not quite as good. Then I remembered we used to have this bakery in town called Ike and Jane, rest in peace. And at Ike and Jane, I used to get this carrot zucchini bread. And I was like, I could probably make carrot zucchini bread. So I go to Kroger, get some, because that's my level, Kroger. That's my level. Anyways, so you have your level and I have mine. But I go to Kroger, I get these zucchinis, come back. And the great part about the zucchinis is actually keeps it pretty moist. Now, some of you hate that word, moist. And so the fact that I'm even saying moist in church, like if he says it one more time, moist. And so, but I was making carrot zucchini bread, loving life, and I'm like, man, like everybody else in the world is stressed out, but like I'm doing totally good, or so I thought until I found this article in The Atlantic with the headline, "The Rise of Anxiety Baking. This year has been rough, make some cookies." So that was the moment that I realized, man, like I am in way deeper than I should. So we are all dealing with our stress and our anxieties and our exhaustion and our burnout in lots of different ways. And if you're here, I just wanted to, and you're feeling burnout, I want to tell you, like, just welcome to the club. That is the result of just the frantic nature of the world. In fact, what we call normal, like a normal pace, a normal load to carry, what we call normal normally leads to burnout. So if you're here today and you're like, man, I'm rolling in super burnout today, there's no judgment. Welcome to the Burnout Society. This is club meeting number 1 today. But we all deal with it, right? Parents are burnt out. Can I get an amen? Yeah, grandparents, empty nesters, you'll deal with this too, because many of you are grandparents, which means you're doing all the work anyways. We see you, appreciate you. Singles are burnt out in dating. All the college students that I lead, honestly, are often very burnt out. In fact, all the research would say that the number one negative emotion that college students report, like on surveys and all that stuff, more than being anxious, more than being depressed, is being tired. So Gen Z is tired. And then, of course, millennials like myself. And Ann Peterson wrote a whole book about this, kind of got famous through an article called How Millennials Became the Burnout Generation. And I related to this quote she said, it's not a temporary affliction. It's the millennial condition. It's our base temperature. It's our background music. It's the way things are. It's our lives. In that article, she talked about something called errand paralysis, which explains why it can be so hard to do such simple things. So like some of you here today, you have a PhD, but you struggle desperately with RSVPs. How do you explain that? Why is it so hard for you to send the thing in? My wife asks me all the time, hey, did you email them back? And it's like, well, sorry, I haven't been emailing them back. I've had a lot, just going on. She's like, what's going on? I'm just like my life. My life as a 37-year-old is hard. It's a lot going on. Sorry, I haven't emailed them back to update the life insurance, And also, why do you care so much about the life insurance? That's a little suspicious. You know what I mean? Why are you prodding so much into that? If you guys could all watch out for me, that would be helpful. But errand paralysis, right? Why is it so hard to do such simple things sometimes? Well, that's what happens when you kind of got this burnout base temperature, as she described it. Now, a lot of it for millennials is what they call the second shift. The second shift would be you go to work all day long and then you come home and you get to be a homemaker as well. In fact, there's a lot of data on this, but the research says that mothers working moms today spend as much time, all right, taking care of their kids. Working moms today spend as much time taking care of their kids as stay-at-home moms did in 1975. So just 50 years later, but now we're doing twice the work. So this is America. So my question is, who can we blame this on? Because I'm here to blame this on somebody and let it not all be my own problem. There's a lot of culprits. Technology is not our friend. Even something seemingly as innocent as the light bulb, right, has now opened up loads of possibilities for how much work we do. In fact, our most popular inventions are the ones that allow us to bypass the limits we used to have. Isn't that true? Your favorite inventions, when a new product comes, you're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea I could, whatever. Our most popular inventions are the ones that allow us to just blow right through the limits we used to have. So in 3 weeks, I'm gonna come back and do a whole talk about our phones and about how screens relate to the Burnout Society, how screens sort of add to this problem. But look, if it feels like your battery is always drained, there might be a reason for that. We'll talk about that in a few weeks. But I read a fascinating book called The Burnout Society, and you don't need to buy the book. It's not a Christian book. It's super heady, not very fun read. We just liked the title and stole the title because, yeah, here we are. But in the book, there is some interesting stuff for our discussion today that might actually kind of help explain some of this for you. And for me, the most interesting thing in the book, and if you were at college nights a couple months ago, we talked about this, was that you can trace the moment that anxiety, depression, really burnout began to rise in the West. And it was the moment that we transitioned to what's called an achievement society. It was the transition from should to could. So let's see if I can help this make sense. For most of our lives, or back in history, they just sort of did what they should do. Like your life was decided for you. That'd be a good way to say that. So like you were just gonna take your parents' job and he was a podiatrist and his dad was a podiatrist and now you're a podiatrist. Or every marriage, or some cultures, where every marriage is an arranged marriage. Now, most of us are not living in an arranged marriage culture. Though, where I live, like 3 miles down the road, one of our best friends, one of our neighbors, is an arranged marriage. Arguably more functional than our non-arranged marriage. But again, another talk for another time. But I say that for this reason. You know who doesn't have a lot of anxiety about finding their spouse? Anyone who's in a culture of arranged marriages, because you just sort of, that's just who you should do. There's no burnout from that. The author of the book saying the burnout's happening now because we're in this sort of could culture. There's no rest in an achievement society. In fact, he says we're not overwhelmed by negativity. This is fascinating. So we turn on the news and we see all the headlines and we're like, man, I'm so overwhelmed by all the negativity. He would say that's not really where burnout comes from, though. Like we might get sad, we might get, it affect us. But burnout, he said, doesn't come from negativity. He said it comes from positivity, and by that he means possibility. That you're not burnt out because of a lack of options in your life. We are burnt out because we're living in this land of possibility, trying to figure it all out. So this was how one of the psychologists they quoted said this. This is Eric Erickson. He said, the patient of today suffers most under the problem of what he should believe and who he should or might be or become. So I got all these options, like what's my major, what's gonna be, and they're trying to ask me when I'm 4 years old what I'm gonna be when I grow up. So I got all these sort of options I'm trying to decide through. While the patient of yesterday, of early psychoanalysis, suffered most under inhibitions which prevented him from being what he thought or knew he was. So before, they were trapped by a ceiling. Does that make sense? Like there's just not a lot of options. Now we are trapped, you are trapped, I am trapped by the exact opposite. In the Burnout Society, there are no limits. And so ultimately, and we got to figure it out. So ultimately, the stress and the exhaustion, he would say, comes from this, what the author calls the burden of life without a fixed destiny. Aren't you came to church that I hear that exciting thought? The burden, this is why you've been so exhausted. The burden of life, trying to figure out your life and what feels like without a fixed destiny. And so in the Burnout Society, that's what we do. We're just always chasing a little bit more, right? A little bit more than we currently have. Certainly a better life than our parents had. Absolutely, if you have a sibling, then you got to live a better life than they did. And that's how you get tired. And that's how you go broke, searching for God knows what. And so in conclusion, what the book would tell us is that it's actually our fear of underperforming that has led to us being overwhelmed. Our fear of underperforming has actually made us overwhelmed. Your fear of underperforming is actually what's causing you to overschedule. It's my fear of underperforming that's actually causing me to overspend or overexert myself. Because in a world without limits, again, no limits, what do? What have you been taught to do? What has been your pattern for the first 22 years of your life, right? Just take it to the limit, right? Just do just a little bit more. In the Burnout Society, you could always do just a little bit more. And part of what I want to convince you today, just in the opening sort of, part of this series, the first meeting of the Burnout Society Club, would be that perhaps less is actually more. That perhaps less on your calendar, that less monthly subscription, maybe less people to follow. There's an idea, right? That less commitments with your time and your money or your energy, less obligations is actually more, or would allow you to actually get more in your life of what you want, right? We fill our life so much that we actually squeeze out the good stuff. Life gets more complicated, right? The more we chase more, often the more complicated our lives become. Thus the ancient wisdom proverb, more money, more problems. I don't remember if that was Biggie or Michael Scott or both. Honestly, two people that we probably need to cite a little bit more at the church. I think we can all agree on that, right? But it's true. Isn't it true? Come on. If you're burnt out right now or you're headed towards burnout, would it be because you don't have a lot going on, not enough on your plate? Or would it be because you have too much on your plate, right? That's how we get that phrase. I have too much on my plate. It's because we're not burning out for not having a lot going on, right? We're burning out because we got too much going on, too much on our plate. Though I have noticed we don't use that phrase very much anymore. We don't often say I've got too much on my plate. Now we have replaced it with a very interesting, similar thought. We have replaced it with, I don't know how I'm going to balance everything on my plate. Right? To which a fairly unbiased outside observer might look at your life and say, well, what if you took something, off of your plate, right? But my hunch is that you feel like I feel, which is that feels like we ain't got no choice. It feels like you ain't got no choice, right? We look at our lives, we look at our kids' schedule, we look at all the school stuff we got to do, get travel ball, like you and your spouse are both working, or maybe you're a solo parent, single parent, so if you got twice the load, right? And all the stuff going on, and honestly, the goal is just to make it to the end of the night. If I can get my nightly bowl of ice cream, right? Shout out Steve and Sal, then that's like sort of the goal, right? Treat myself because I did it, because I survived the day. That's like the win in the Burnout Society, right? Like, we like to be attacked today. We're just trying to survive the day, if we're being honest. That's more our vibe, right? It's just survive the day. Or you're a college student, and so you're filling your schedule. But it's the same thing, except yours just goes like 2 or 3 in the morning. So you're having somehow to do this on even less sleep. We should do a whole talk about sleep in this series. But I want to try to bring some good news today. And part of what I want to persuade you in this talk is that you actually have more control than you think you do. That maybe there are more options than you think you do. And honestly, this is, I would say, be even more good news. You came into church today thinking you had any number of problems, right? Maybe you came in today thinking you got a marriage problem. Maybe you came in today and you're thinking, I got a parenting problem, or I've got an anxiety problem. You've been told you have an anxiety problem, or you have an academic problem. Maybe somebody very important told you have an academic problem. I want to propose that you might have a little more control than you think, and that maybe the most spiritual thing you could do in this series, or at least to start this series, that would improve your marriage, that would improve your anxiety, that would improve your parenting, that would actually even improve your academics, would be if you found a way to acquire one little word, 6 letters, margin. Some space between your current pace and your limits. A long time ago, we did a series called Breathing Room, that same idea of breathing room. Now, what I'm not talking about is a vacation, right? Sometimes vacation is the problem, but it makes sense. What do? We convince ourselves that a little time off is gonna help, right? Your time off is not the problem. The problem is how you're spending your time on. What we have to address in this series, what your wife has been desperately trying to get you addressed, what your friends are trying to get you addressed, is not escaping the whole thing. What they've been trying to get you to address is how you're spending your Monday through Fridays, right? Even Sunday's not enough just to fix it. You got to leave here today and make some changes. The problem is how we spend our time on. Vacation's just a Band-Aid. What you need is margin. Now, unfortunately, most of us cannot just go buy margin. I cannot. Some of you can. And if you can, and you can shred the wealth, please do. We're now accepting margin for those of you who can afford it. But I cannot afford to just leave here and go buy margin. Does that make sense? Some people can. I can't leave here and go buy margin. You probably can't leave here and just go buy margin. And so for most of us, this is important, margin requires sacrifice. And if you're taking notes, write that down. Margin requires sacrifice, which, again, who wants to do that? But I think we would all agree that more margin does equal less stress. More margin does equal less stress. Yes or no, right? It does, because what's the opposite, right? Too much pressure, and then I break down. Too much financial pressure, you feel this, right? And that awful, terrible feeling of another bill coming in. Too much financial pressure, and you break down. No relational margin, and now my marriage suffers. On and on and on. And if I ignore margin, I get stress. And if I ignore stress for long enough, if you ignore stress for long enough, eventually you will burn out. And I will burn out. And if you're here today and you are on the edge of burnout, again, no judgment. This is probably God's divine timing in your life to bring you here for this series, right? But if you're dealing with this, if you're starting to feel this, right? But burnout is just that thought, right? That your soul can no longer wear the weight of your life. Anybody feel that? My soul can no longer wear the weight of my life. That's called burnout, right? And if you are experiencing that, you are probably learning a very difficult but true reality, which is that when you live life to the limit, you no longer enjoy your life. And this is the craziest thing, and none of us are immune to this. Adults, college students are adults, you know what I mean? Old people, young people, none of us are immune to this. The Burnout Society gets you to just spin and spin and spin and spin and spin. Fill your schedule, got to keep up with the bells. They got it, now you got it, they're doing it, now you got to do it. We got to fill and fill and fill to fill our life. To ultimately, what I think we're trying to do is maximize our happiness. But the terrible irony is this, that there's a threshold there somewhere, that when you cross it and I cross it, we cease to any longer enjoy our life. And that's not even the scary part. Because at a certain point, we go from not only, no longer enjoying our life, but eventually we actually lose control of our life. And let's be honest, nobody who makes as much money as you do should feel as out of control of their life as you do. There are people here today who make way less money than you do, who have a way greater sense of control over their life, who are way happier than you are, not because they're smarter than you, better than you, more godly than you, luckier than you. They're just people that have learned to live with a little bit of margin and not take things to the limit every time. So why do we do this? Well, it turns out it's human nature. And I want to go to one story in the scriptures from Genesis chapter 11 called the Tower of Babel. And if you brought your Bible, turn to Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel. And the way I want to do this is I just want to read it through, and then we're going to go back a little bit and try to pick apart what's actually happening. Because on the surface, this seems, like a simple story, but I think there's some real depth to it. So Genesis 11, beginning in verse 1, New International Version, not necessarily better than the others, just my personal favorite. Here it is, number 1, and the ESV. But anyway, here we go. Verse 1, now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. Now that sounds harmless, other than the fact that that is don't miss this, exact opposite of what God told them to do. God's instruction was to go, fill the whole earth, be fruitful, multiply. And they said, here's a cool spot. Let's just stay right here. That's the exact opposite of what God called them to do. That's important to note as this journey kind of continues. Now, verse 3, they said to each other, come, let's make bricks and bake them. See, they're baking too, right? It's the carrot and zucchini right there. They're baking too. And they use brick instead of stone. That would not be tasty. And tar for mortar. But look, they're not baking, pastries. They're building something else. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that, love this, I relate to this, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth. Now, not the whole point of the talk, but do you relate to that phrase? Make a name for ourselves? One of the things I've just been pondering the last few weeks is, why do I care about that? What is it in me that wants that? For them, they said it right there. They admitted it. Otherwise, we'll be scattered over the face of the whole earth. Now, from there's some great comedy in the story. And ultimately, God says to his sort of heavenly community, all right, let's go down there. Let's go see what this tower is all about. Let's go find the tower. Let's go look at the tower, which is comedy, right? Because we believe that God can actually see the tower. So what he's really saying is, there's the tower. There, look at that. Look, cute little tower. Y'all been working on this sweet little tower. Look at the tower they made. That's sort of the idea here, right? Is that let's go down. They're so proud of their tower, and God's going down to just look at the little bitty tower they've been working on. It's so good. But ultimately, again, like we've been saying, this is the exact opposite of what God called them to do. And so he intervenes. And don't miss this, it's important. Not out of jealousy. God is fine. Not out of jealousy, out of wisdom, out of mercy. And to me, what's so funny and why this is, again, I read this sort of like comedy because I'm sick like that. What's so funny to me is their greatest fear, right, was being scattered over the whole earth. So look how it ends in verse 8. So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. I bet they did. Isn't that great? Listen to what they said. They said, this is why, we'll keep going, that is why it was called Babel. Because they're going to make an app someday where we can learn a lot of the languages. No, that's why it's called Babel. Because thanks, somebody got it. Because the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there, again, just to like drive it home, from there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. Now, this just is not the whole point of the story, but it feels important to say. God did not allow evil to rise up and overtake the world. Some of us look around the culture and the world and wonder, like, is that what's happening? Look, God did not allow evil to take over. God did not allow rebellion and disobedience to take over. Instead, he replaced it with something way more beautiful. He replaced it with worldwide diversity. Now, bonus question for you. Because I don't know what's been going on in your life. Maybe things are going great, but maybe they're not going great. Maybe things are not going good at work. Maybe things are not going good with some of your involvements. Maybe things are not going good financially for you. I mean, crypto, and then, So I don't know what your thing is. But look, bonus question. What if some of the turmoil, what if some of the resistance that you've been experiencing in pursuit of the Burnout Society is actually God's mercy in your life? Would a good God who loves you, knows what you need, sees your family, would a good God who loves you ever tear down a tower in your life because he actually thought it was better for you, because he had a better vision for your life than you continuing to exceed your limits? He has done it before. Now, Babel is just the beginning. You may be more familiar with its name in the Greek, which is Babylon, right? And Babylon was a place, but Babylon is also a way. And it's a way that runs counter to the way of Jesus. This is all throughout Scripture. Even how the Scriptures end in the book of Revelation is in a lot of ways Jesus conquering this Babylonian idea, this world, this burnout society type idea. That's, in a lot of ways, what we're going to be talking about in the series. Putting those two ways right next to each other. Because there is a way that's all about striving and building and climbing and exhausting yourself and spending yourself to who knows what, right? Trying to just keep up with the Joneses. Or there is an alternative way. And it's a way that's about rest. And it's a way that's about trusting God. And it's about striving less. And it's about anxiety coming down. And it's about peace. And it's about getting your life back, right? It's about how, if you want to, we can help you. You can choose to. You have community that will support you in opting out of the Burnout Society. But it's going to take some work. And if you're anything like me, like I'm such an activator, so I come to series like this, and it's like, all right, here we go. So this is what we're talking about? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and change this on my schedule, and I'm going to change this in my finance and a budget, and I'm going to change this on my diet. And he didn't even talk about diet, but now I'm on Whole30, and I'm just like all in, making all the practical changes that I want. And I'll tell you, this series is going to be really practical, maybe more practical than you want it to be, maybe more challenging than you want it to be. We're going to get into all the practical stuff, right? But before we do that, we have to go just a layer deeper. Again, right before we dive into all the practical stuff, because I love what John Ortberg said about this. He has a great quote about hurry. So this whole series is not exactly about hurry, but he said hurry, and maybe you feel hurry. I don't know if you feel hurried right now. If you feel hurried about the thought of whatever's coming your way tomorrow or this week. He said hurry is not just the symptom of a disordered schedule, but he said hurry is the symptom of a disordered heart. You got that? Not just the symptom of a disordered schedule. Again, I look at my hurried life sometimes and think, man, I got to get my schedule sorted out. And he's going, and maybe wisdom's going, maybe you got to like get something even deeper sorted out in there. So what we want to do in this series, and what I want to even invite you into today, just a little bit, is to begin to have some honest conversations about what on earth is driving the drive that you have. And what is driving the drive that I have. Because, and this is why I love the tower story, I want to go back to it in a second. To me, the tower is an outward expression of some inner realities. Does that make sense? Like you don't just up and build a tower for no reason. The tower has motivation. There's a reason why you do that, right? They had a tower. I have a tower. You have towers, right? And our towers are outward expressions of some internal reality. So as we begin to kind of wrap up, let's put the verse 4, back up on the screen. And I want to ask you this. I'll give you 3 seconds of silence to figure it out or find your own answer for this. Why did they build this tower? What was going on the inside of them that would cause them to build this tower? Anybody? Okay, quiet crowd, ready for brunch. I get it. Okay, so maybe pride, right? They said it right there, make a name for ourselves. I want to make a name for myself. Maybe distrust. You remember what happened like literally right before this in history, right before this in the book of Genesis? God flooded the entire earth. So their response to God flooding the entire earth is, let's build a tower so tall that God could never scatter us over the whole earth. Now, joke's on them, ha ha ha. But it's distrust when the world floods, and your next step is to build a tower. I feel like God's speaking to my heart this morning about this. I feel like he told me this morning, he showed me I build idols too. All my towers are idols too. They're just my way of saying I trust this thing more than God. I'm pursuing this because I ultimately think that's going to bring me security or happiness more than God. Maybe for some of us, it would be, the reason would be a lack of faith. In fact, I was thinking about anybody here today who's not a Christian. And if that's you, I'm so glad you're here. In so many ways, we built this church for you. My prediction, and not even really knowing you, my prediction would be that you are really responsible. Maybe more responsible than some of the Christians you know, which bothers you. But my prediction would be, or my, hypothesis, or what I would wonder is, I bet you have built quite the tower of responsibility in your life. You have protected it for yourself and for others. And when I read this passage, I can't help but wonder, how much of your tower of responsibility is just your way of compensating? It's you having to compensate for what you might perceive to be an absent God. If God feels like he's been distant in your life, you're going to build that tower. And the last one, and we'll begin to be done, is this. I think it's probably fear. I put in my notes, how much of what we call ambition is actually fear? And in my experience, the taller the tower, the greater the fear. We don't know what to do with the fear, and so we just build towers, but we know it's fear because when we get into conversations like this, and we start a series like this, and it's like, oh no, and your wife's nudging you because you already know what your action step's gonna be, and you've already begun to negotiate with her and God and yourself about why you don't wanna do that thing, right? What do you say? In your brain or even out loud, you say, well, I can't do that. If I start that, if we start that, if I actually do that, if we get rid of that, if we sell that, what do we say? We say, I'm afraid that. That's what we say. I'm afraid that I'm not gonna have enough money. I'm afraid that our kids aren't gonna have enough opportunities. I'm afraid if I start working less, if I get off the road a little bit, if I dial that part of my life back, I'm afraid that I'm gonna get passed over in the company. I'm afraid I'm gonna get passed over in my major. I'm afraid that somebody else is gonna get chosen instead of me, right? I'm afraid that I'm just gonna end up like everybody else. Or maybe the worst one of all, I'm afraid that God's not gonna come through for me. That was them. I'm afraid that God's not gonna come through for me. We build towers out of fear. Fear of falling behind, fear of not mattering, and ultimately, fear of missing out, FOMO. And so, to wrap us up, I want to introduce you to a new term for this series, and it's called, from the producers of FOMO comes NOMO. And NOMO is the necessity of missing out. I love that. None of you wrote that down in your notes. You need to do that. That's the whole point of the talk today. Please write that down. I'm dead serious. The necessity of missing out. Look at me. If you want anxiety to come down in your life, if you want to get breathing room in your life, if you want to get your life back, stop being so stressed all the time, if you want to get out of debt, which you can, you have to do something. Margin requires sacrifice, so you have to embrace, more than the fear of missing out, you have to embrace the necessity of missing out. And I discovered this in a book by Jenny Odell, but as soon as I read it, I thought that is a central gospel idea. Jesus all the time talked about denying yourself, talked about working less than we could, right? Talked about spending less than we could. Jesus said these wild thoughts like, hey, anybody who leaves houses or families or friends, fields, right, for my sake, you're gonna get them back 100 times as more. Like the Christian life has always been about embracing NOMO. I would say that your faith not only allows for that to happen, I would say if you're a Christian, your faith empowers you to do that, right? You can have that sort of internal peace like the King David had, who said, the Lord is my shepherd, I actually don't lack anything. You can come to a shift like the Apostle Paul had, who said, all the things that I used to think were gain, the things I was trying to get, now I view them as lost. Now I view them as things that I want to get rid of. You and I think that the missing out is a bad thing. And what wisdom is telling us, and I think what scripture is telling us, and what this Tower of Babel story is telling us, is that missing out is not a bad thing. It's in fact a requirement. It's a must. And your fear of missing out is actually the thing that's kind of been driving your life off the rails. My fear of missing out is the thing that ultimately makes me exhausted and burn out. But if I could get over my fear of missing out and begin to embrace the necessity of missing out, then I might actually catch my breath from it. I might actually find a better way of life. So, as one of your pastors and somebody who loves you and cares about you very much, I want to give you permission. I wish I could have given you a physical one of these. I'm going to give you a NOMO card, and I want to give you permission to play it as much as you need to this week. I hereby want to empower you to embrace the necessity of missing out to your heart's content. So, when your in-laws call and invite you over, you just tell them, one of my pastors said, I can't do it. I got to embrace the necessity of missing out. We're trying to scale back, right? Or somebody clapped, like that was from God to you. Okay, so, or from somebody, maybe somebody asked you on a date, and that's not exactly what you need to be doing right now. You just tell them, hey, sorry, I'm going to miss out on this one, but maybe her or him, but I'm going to embrace missing out in this moment. And I'm mostly joking. But, this is how we get hooked on social media. This is why we get so addicted to social media, right? Come talk about, again, screen time in a few weeks. The average Gen Z student spends over 10 hours a day on their phone. Whoa, is right. It's the fear of missing out. I don't want to miss out. What are they doing? What's going on? I don't want to, adults, we do it the same way. Grown old people, right? Catch up with the news. Don't want to miss what's going on, right? It's fear of missing out, right? But the truth is, we miss out on 99.999999999% of things happen anyways, right? That's the reality of missing out. That's the Romo. That's the Tony Romo, right? That's the reality of missing out. So you miss 99.9999. And so you need to embrace the necessity of missing out. And I tell you what, I was talking to somebody about this between services, and they said, hey, I want to tell you, it's not just the Romo. They said, it's the Jomo. And I said, what is the Jomo? I'm interested. And they said, the Jomo is the joy of missing out. And everybody over the age of 40 was like, I'm into that. I'm into not having to go any more commitments in my life. But he said, this guy, we were talking to one of our volunteers, he said, yeah, when you embrace the necessity of missing out, you actually begin to experience how good that is. Imagine that. Imagine next time you are tempted to buy the thing that you don't honestly need to buy, that I don't really need to buy. Imagine the next time you're tempted to commit to the thing you probably shouldn't commit to right now. Instead of thinking, I'm afraid I'm going to miss out, imagine instead being able to embrace, this might actually be better for me. I can actually be glad. You talk about self-care, live in a world of self-care. I might be treating myself better by saying no. Less might be more. Margin requires sacrifice. It's good to embrace the necessity of missing out. And so we've already talked about small groups, but I want to give you 4 questions to ask in your small group this week. And if you're not in a small group, what are you doing? We'll help you get into one. Maybe you can send this message to a friend and y'all can watch it and talk it out. But these are the 4 questions I want you to ask specifically, okay, so that we can not just be hearers of the word, but be doers of the word and see if this can actually be applicable to your life. Like, how does this apply to you? Right? What does God want to do in you? What does he want to set you free from? Where does he want to give you rest? So 4 questions real quick. Here they are. Number 1, where is your emotional gauge? We talked about that earlier, but sometimes we show up to small group or we show up to friends. Again, maybe this will be a supper club for you. We show up to our friends and it's like, how's it going? It's great, And on the inside, you're just like, you need a jump start. You're asking people in the parking lot for cables. That's how much you're struggling. But you don't admit that to your closest friends, your church community. So question 1 is, how are you really doing? Where's your emotional gauge really? Number 2, what's your tower? We all have one. Let's not pretend like we don't. We all have places where we are tempted to exceed our limits, to blow right past them, to build something, because again, it's all we know how to do with our fear and anxiety, all those things. So where do you do it? Is it your work? Is it school stuff? Like, what are you building? Why? Why are you building it, right? Number 3, I love this, and we didn't spend a lot of time talking about it, so this would be great for small group. But what do you want? Like, what do you crave more of? Or maybe another way to ask it would be, where do you need more margin in your life? It's interesting, way back in the 1800s, Robert Louis Stevenson was talking about busyness. He's got this great quote. It says that busyness is a symptom of deficient vitality. What does that mean? The symptom of deficient vitality. It means that if I don't have a lot going on the inside, or again, maybe I've allowed myself to lose the clarity of what matters to me, of my deeper why, of what I'm here for, what I care about. If I have deficient vitality on the inside, I will spend a lot of time and a lot of money searching for it on the outside. And what that looks like is busyness. This is a lot of the college students I know. This is a lot of the millennial parents that I know, right? Searching because of a deficient vitality. So a great question to ask is to stop for 5 minutes, ask yourself, ask your spouse, ask your friends, your small group, what do we actually want? I'm making all these choices about how I spend my time and my money, but is this actually what I care about? What do I actually care about, right? What matters most to me? And then last one, what would it look like for you to embrace no-mo in this season? In other words, what's a good sacrifice that you could make? What's something that you might need to say? I mean, you're not saying no forever, but you're saying no for right now. What would be a good trade you could make? And my suspicion would be this. My suspicion would be as you begin to work through this, if you'll take the courage and time to do this, you will probably begin to see some patterns. So maybe you're here and you're like, this is painfully obvious. Stop talking. I already know. My tower is my work. But now that you mention it, the thing that I actually want, the thing that we've been talking about, how do we do it, is more time with my kids because their time in our house is limited. The clock's ticking. And so maybe for you, no-mo would mean less time being gone, less traveling, less work stuff, dialing back, sacrificing some of your work life, choosing to cheat your work instead of cheating your family, right? Maybe you're a college student or a single adult here today. You would go, honestly, my tower is my social life. It's rocking, it's balling, I'm doing great. My social media life. But the problem is what I want, this was somebody I talked to recently, college student. They said what I wanted was actually to get to know God more. I had this spiritual hunger and desire, and honestly, I'd never been good at reading the Bible. And so for them, no-mo meant deleting some apps or really putting some boundaries in place so they could spend less time working on their kind of social media empire and more time in the Word. They told me it was a great trade. So does that make sense? So we're gonna work you through this. I really believe this series is divinely timed for a lot of people, and that there is a lot of people here today, or a lot of people watching this, who will make life-changing decisions in the next 6 weeks in the series. Decisions about how you handle your money. Decisions about how you choose to invest your time. Decisions about your job and your work and your career and retirement and all that stuff, right? Decisions about your family or your major. I believe you're gonna make life-changing decisions in this series. We're gonna help. We're gonna take it 1 week at a time. Next week, Stephen's gonna be here talking all about rest. If you need rest, if you know somebody who needs it, I don't know anybody who's better at helping teach more practically than Stephen, and he's gonna guide us through what it means to practically find rest. And so I hope you'll bring a friend back for that. But let me pray for you, and we'll be done. God, we say this often, or pray this prayer often, but will you give us the wisdom to know what to do and the courage to do it? Will you take the things that we talked about today and through your Spirit illuminate in our life what do you want us to do, where we might need to pay attention? I pray you will give us the courage to open our whole life up before you, like to open our schedule and our budget and our wants and our dreams and our families and to lay them bare before you and ultimately say, God, I believe your way is better than the way of the world. I believe your pace is better. I believe that you love me and you want to guide me. So I pray you would do that for us in this series. And I pray all this in Jesus' name.